Good day. My name is Michael Mulondo, and I'm going to present on the subject of ethics for HIV management for the degree level, third year. And the purpose of this presentation is to discuss the 8 assignments that you are supposed to submit. And during this presentation, I'm going to give you some guidelines and discuss in details what you have to do with regard to your assignments. The first assignment is going to look at the non-maleficence, looking at the whole concept of primum non nocere. Now, primum non nocere, it's a Latin word which means first, do no harm. It's an ethical principle which is actually very much more famous, and it's a non-maleficence as part of your ethical principle. So we are going to discuss this in detail, what is expected from you for your assignment and what you have to do. The second assignment, we're going to look at the ethical principles, where we will look at people living with HIV/AIDS, looking specifically at the principle of fairness, entitlement, and equality. And then we're also going to discuss the issue of discrimination. And during this, when we're going to cover this assignment, I'm going to explain to you in detail what is then also expected for you. The third assignment is looking at normative ethics, and you have normative ethics. It's looking at the wrong and the right of ethics, and ethics actually only means what is your moral beliefs, your moral principle of what you think or what you believe is right or wrong. And then we're going to look specifically people living with HIV/AIDS. Is it right or is it wrong to discriminate them? And you have to discuss it with examples. The fourth one, it's also normative, but we're going to look at applied ethics. We're also going to look at how do you apply ethics when it comes to people living with HIV/AIDS, and we're going to discuss this in detail. The fourth assignment is going to look at the medieval philosophy, and so you're going to discuss the 3 different philosophies. The first one is the medieval, the second is the modern, and the third one is the contemporary philosophy, where you're going to discuss in detail what this philosophy is all about. And you're going to focus in your assignment how does these 3 philosophy then apply to people, to the care and support of people living with HIV/AIDS in Namibia. Then the 6th one is you're going to look at the medical ethics. What is medical ethics? What are the views of medical ethics? And in the light of pre- and post-test counseling, how can you apply medical ethics during this time? And you have to illustrate that with practical examples. Assignment 7 is looking at the rights of people, and you're going to look at the Namibian Constitution, and you will look at how does the Constitution of Namibia protect the rights of people living with HIV/AIDS. Then the last assignment, assignment 8 is looking at John Locke. It's looking at the social contract, and then the theory of John Locke with regard to the social contract, and how that is then linked to the right of citizens with regard to the respect, their fulfillment, and their protection. So we're quickly going to go through the 8 assignment. Assignment 8 is looking at primum non nocere, which is a Latin word which actually means first, do no harm. And this is mostly where you're going to do research and you're going to involve people or human beings. Now, for you working with human beings as part of your research, you have to adhere to this ethical principle that the first of most is that you must ensure that you do not do any harm to anyone and to any citizen or the person that you're going to research on. Now, the basic principle that is being used is non-maleficence, which is actually is that you will make sure that you will protect any person from any kind of harm, and this is what makes it very important. Then primum non nocere is also looking at when you are going to make any medical decision, there are certain things that you have to look at, and of course the principle is you don't want to do any harm. So you are going to look at certain risk of this patient, you are going to calculate this risk, and based on that, you are going to make the final decision. But of course, to make sure that the that the sanctity of your patient is then protected and no harm will come. The other thing is also looking at the issue of treatment. You must make sure that when you give treatment to a patient, you have to look at the action or the non-action, unwillingness to offer this treatment to the patient. And then, of course, what primum non nocere stands for, it also talks about respect, trust, which is very fundamental between a doctor-patient relationship, and then also between a researcher and a researchee. So it's very important to look at all of this aspect. And then it's very important that primum non nocere is also looking at the private care of children and their families, and then to make sure that you're going to accommodate and recognize the different views of different people, as you're also going to give them advice and treatment. So you have to discuss this in detail, where you're going to look at the aspects of this ethical principle and then apply it to a daily life. Give it some example. You might come up with a project, a research project, and say, how are you going to apply this principle in a research project? Now, assignment number 2 is looking at the different ethical principle, and you're going to look specifically at people that are living with HIV/AIDS and with regard to their status, and then looking also at discrimination. Now, there are a number of ethical principles that you have to look at, and I'm just going to give a number of them. The first one is autonomy, which means that if you are going to deal with people and those that are that you're going to work with, you have to make sure that you first get their informed consent. And autonomy means actually the right of self. The right of self, making your own free will, your own choice, as much as possible. And this is a principle which is mostly violated, where people are not being informed about their rights, and also informed that they might give permission. Then we've got beneficence, which actually just means that it's a basic principle that you will care for those that you're going to work with, whether it's patients or those that you're going to counsel, or whether you're going to do a research. What kind of care are you going to care for them, give them, which is very important. Non-maleficence, we've discussed this under the first assignment of the Latin word primum non nocere, which means that you will not give any harm, or you will not harm anybody. And then, of course, the ethical principle of justice, where you will talk about transparency, which means you will be open, you will not hide anything, you will be truthful to your client, or to the person that you are going to get information from as a researcher. And of course, accountability, which is very important, that you are going to make sure that you are accountable to that person or to anyone as part of your responsibility. And then consistency, you're going to look into those. And even during this discussion of ethical principle, you can discuss the issue of stigma vis-a-vis discrimination. And then you can also, in your assignment, bring up the whole Namibian legal framework, the different frameworks we've got in Namibia, the instrument that discuss these ethical principles, whether it's the Constitution, the policy on HIV/AIDS, the national policy on HIV/AIDS, the employment policy, labor policy, the AIDS Charter. So there are so many frameworks and instruments that you can bring in during this assignment. Then, of course, the third assignment is looking at the word normative ethics. And normative only comes from the word norm, which means the standard. There are certain standards that you have to adhere to as a human being, certain basic rules that you have to adhere to as part of your moral principle or your moral stance when it comes to specific things. And this is what normative is. So in your discussion, you have to discuss the 3 types of normative ethics, how you're going to apply this in your assignment, and specifically looking at the issue of people living with HIV/AIDS. When you are going to look at discrimination, is it wrong or is it right to discriminate these people? And how are you going to apply normative ethics to discuss this issue? Give practical example, discuss in details as much as possible, so that whoever going to read it will understand what is expected from them. Then the fourth assignment is going to look at applied ethics. And this is also with regard to HIV/AIDS. You are going to discuss what is applied ethics, and in your discussion, you might bring out the issue of applied ethics. Why do you need applied ethics? How do you use applied ethics? And applied ethics only deals what it actually deals with a relationship between two or more people, and how communities are being affected. And this is what you have to bring us in your assignment. So you can also compare it to the normative principle, where you're also going to look at the normative principle as much as possible, and with regard to applied ethics. So the first assignment, you are going to look, for example, at the three different theories that are there. You will discuss the different three theories, and in the light of people living with HIV/AIDS, the care and the support of people living with HIV/AIDS, and you are going to give some practical example. So in your assignment, first define what is a medieval philosophy, what is a modern philosophy, and what is contemporary philosophy. So I'm quickly going to give you a synopsis and just an explanation what these are. So the medieval philosophy actually is very much more concerned on the nature of God. And Aristotle was one of the greatest philosophers during this time, where he actually brought up the whole concept of logic and thought. And what Aristotle was saying during the medieval philosophy or medieval age was that when you are looking at life, you have to look life from a perspective of logic and a perspective of basic thought. And in your assignment, you can bring out Aristotle or also other philosophers as an example during the medieval age. So then you've got, secondly, the modern philosophy, which many know as the age of reasoning. And this is mostly the time of what we call the age of enlightenment, where there were so many, or we can also call it the Renaissance, where so many things happened during this time. The invention of the first press, the translation of the Bible, the consciousness or the human consciousness of thought, the start of basic philosophy, Plato, the Greek philosophy during this time. So there are so many, and the modern philosophy actually was what we call the early modern philosophy, and most of our philosophy that's being that are being used today are actually based also during this age. So in your discussion, bring out the whole concept of modern philosophy, what it means and how you can apply it, for an example, to people living with HIV/AIDS in Namibia. Then you've got the 20th the contemporary philosophy, which looks at the 20th century. And there are so many things, and the contemporary philosophies actually are using the medieval philosophy as the basis of its philosophy. And this is where you have so many philosophy, especially in psychology, human relations, where people are using certain principles as a belief system, and which can actually guide people. So bring out those concepts as much as possible to discuss it. Now, medical ethics actually only says that if you are going to apply medical, or you're in the medical profession, there are certain ethical principles that you have to adhere to, which makes it very important. And because this is what they call the doctor-patient privileges or relationship. Now, in a medical profession, whether you are a nurse, or whether you are a doctor, or whatever medical practitioner you is, just know that the patient is the most important client. And this is where ethics becomes very, very much important. So in your assignment, you are going to look at the values of the medical ethics. And you then are going to say is, when you are a counselor, HIV counselor, and you are going to do counseling, looking at pre-test and post-test counseling, how are you going to use the medical ethics as a guide in counseling these people that are HIV positive, and as much as possible also to guide them so that you can make the right decision. Now, there are different philosophy that you can look at. Now, as you can look, there is a table when it comes to the values of the medical ethics. So this is just an example. So in your assignment, you are expected to give more information and then to research more on the subject. So this is just a basic, this is just a guide to help you. So the first one is autonomy, and what it actually says is you need to respect the individual, and in the stage the patient. And then, of course, it's very important that you have to look at this whole issue of respect, which makes it very important. Otherwise, you will have an issue where if you don't show respect, that people will have a sense of you lack caring. Then we've got beneficence, which means that you have to do good, doing good to the patient, which is much more important. Then we've got non-maleficence, which means that you don't need to do any harm. And as we've discussed in assignment 1, that you also need to make sure that at the end of the day, the first thing that you must have, you must not do any harm to your patient. Justice, which talks about fairness. Veracity, which talks about being truthful as a counselor. And then, of course, fidelity, which means that you have to maintain your confidentiality. And the client must have confidence in you as a counselor as much as possible. So these are some of the things that you have to apply when it comes to the 6 values of the medical ethics. Now, assignment 7 is just looking at the rights of people living with HIV/AIDS, and this is where you have to consult the Constitution. You have to look at the HIV Charter, and then there is a very good book that I will actually, a report that I will refer you to, that you can look at as also as part of this assignment. And because during this assignment you have to discuss what is the right of people living with HIV/AIDS. How does the Constitution protect these people? So now the book that, or the report that I'm referring to, it was published in 2015, and it looks at the 6th report on the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So in this report of 2015, it will give you an idea if Namibia made any progress or not. I will also encourage you to look at other related publications when it comes to the human rights and the rights of people in Namibia, and their rights as people living with HIV/AIDS. Now, the last and the 8th assignment is very important. It all look at the social contract and how that's very much more important for you to discuss it. Now, John Locke was one of the famous philosophers that believed in social contract. And what it actually says, that society or community, they do have rights, and they do have also responsibility, and their rights has to be protected. Now in the social contract, you have the people themselves, but you also have authorities or the government. Now, and John Locke is discussing this whole relationship between the people and authority, and the right of people and the authority, which is the government, and how is this right and the authority of people being exploited by the government or not. Now he's giving two principles which you can use in your assignment. The first one is pactum unionis, and the second one is pactum subjectionis. Now, pactum unionis, it's a one thought or principle of social contract which says that people must respect each other, they must live in harmony, and if they live in harmony and they respect each other, there will be peace. And you can discuss this all in the context of Namibia as a country and see how this is being applied and how is this applicable to the nation. And you can also compare it with other Southern African countries in SADC, specifically when it comes to pactum unionis. Then you've got pactum subjectionis, where it actually only says that even if people are united, that even if people obey the authority, they have the right not to surrender their freedom to authorities. And this is what social contract is looking at, specifically John Locke. Now, John Locke, the basic thing what he's saying is actually in comparison with Thomas Hobbes and Jacques Rousseau. What he is saying is that people are having the right. As much as having their right, they cannot or they must not surrender this right to the authority. So that's what the basic of social contract, what makes it very much more important. Now, if you compare these two, you're looking at pactum unionis and pactum subjectionis, which is the basic principle of social contract. You have to look at what does John Locke say with regard to the right of people. What does John Locke say with regard to the surrender and the subjectivity of people and their rights to this authority and to this government? Does the government in Namibia have the right over, or the authority over the rights of its citizen, or does the citizen have certain basic right? And if you look at the Constitution of Namibia, which you can also use Article 21, where it talks about the freedom rights of people and the rights of Namibians, so you can also discuss this with regard to Article 21 of the Constitution of Namibia, looking, even if the Constitution says that Namibians are having these specific rights, are those rights and those freedom protected by the government of Namibia? And this is where you can also look at very critically, and John Locke is looking at this very critically, and he explains it, and because he's got a different view what Thomas Hobbes and Jacques Rousseau is having. So when you are going to look at the theory of John Locke in regard to social contract, for each argument that John Locke is actually using, I will suggest that you will give practical example for each argument, and as you will give those practical example, you have to critically explain why do you say that if the government of Namibia does not protect the right or respect the right of its citizen, why? And if it does, then you have to explain why it does. And this is the whole discussion you can have in your assignment as much as possible. I will also advise you that you can also give some practical example of people, Namibians. You can take extract from newspaper, from news articles, where you can explain the whole social contract when it comes to the right and freedom of the citizen themselves, and where their rights and their freedom has been violated as much as possible. So during your discussion, bring us out and discuss in detail how that's very much more important. And now, if most people are also asking, for an example, in terms of the respect, what do you mean with respect? So if you say that you you have to respect another, or you want other people to respect, the question in your discussion, you can also talk about the issue of respect, because respect is not found, but respect is earned. What do you do as a person to respect or to earn the respect of another? And it's very important that you have to discuss this in detail. So these are the 8 assignments which you are supposed to do, and I hope that this presentation will help you and guide you to do your assignment. So I will also encourage you for you to look at other resources as much as possible, and then also consult your guideline, your study guide, and then also other resources as much as possible, so that you can use those resources as a tool. So as I say, I hope this presentation will help you as a guide, and I wish you then all the best for your assignment, and good luck. Thank you.